Hey, it's Dave here for Audiomo, taking a look at the Harley Benton DNA FX Get Pro. So I've had this here in the studio for a couple of days, and I thought I'd throw it through the paces of what I normally use in modeler for, which is primarily demo tracking. So I put together a mix using the Harley Benton and the Line 6 HX STOMP. We're just going to take a listen to a couple of tones side by side. So what you're going to hear is 3 sets of riffs with 4 tones each. The first tone is the Harley Benton with an own hammer impulse response that I use all the time. The second tone is the Harley Benton with stock IRs right from the box. The third tone is Line 6, the HX STOMP, with the same exact own hammer impulse response. And the fourth is the Line 6 with its own stock IR right from its box. So let's take a listen to those. So as you can hear, both of the tones here from both boxes are pretty good, and that's kind of the thing with tones like this, right? When you're listening to it next to each other, you can spot huge differences, but if you were listening to just one tone over the entirety of the track, you wouldn't even notice that there was an issue with any of these, right? So there's some obvious characteristics and sort of flavors that are going on. The Harley Benton, when using its own stock IRs, has that really kind of digital 2005 brand new modeler kind of sound, and the Line 6 kind of crushes it in that aspect. Although I do think the interesting thing here to note is that personally I think Line 6 kind of drops the ball on the IRs, and the Line 6 sounds about 1,000,000 times better with that own hammer and impulse response than it does using its own stock IRs. But either way, the Harley Benton can get very workable tones if you're willing to put the time in. That being said, I have 3 main frustrations with this device. First being that I use a lot of these own hammer impulse responses pretty frequently, and right out of the box, they always sound great, except in this case. I had to do a lot of tweaking to get the Harley Benton to really work with these IRs, and it's very strange for me. It's really noticeable when you put the Line 6 using the own hammer versus the Harley Benton using the own hammer next to each other, that they just sound miles different, and they use those IRs very differently. The second frustration is that it's extremely limited in terms of what kind of flexibility you can use with the blocks, right? So you have more blocks on this than you do with the HX STOMP, but those blocks are not customizable. So if you want 2 delays, you can't do it. You've got 1 delay block. If you want 2 reverbs, you can't do it. You've got 1 reverb block. Maybe that's okay, but for me, when we're using in a live situation, I like different cabs. There's only 1 cab block. So I think it kind of lends itself to only very basic workflows, and that might be fine for you, but for me, it's not really flexible enough. The third major frustration here is that there seems to be something wrong with the custom IR loading within the Harley Benton actual box. So I'm going to show you an example here. If I go out of this box directly with a cab disabled and I throw a cab on in Pro Tools, it's going to sound one way, and then when I take that same exact IR and load it directly into the Harley Benton using its own cab loader, the sounds are drastically different. I've searched all through the menus and all through the settings, and I can't seem to find any fix for why this is. I'm making sure that everything within the Harley Benton is disabled, like the tube emulation or high pass and low pass filters and cuts, and same thing on the Pro Tools end. So by all accounts, these should sound identical, and you're going to hear here they sound wildly different. So along with that extremely weird little quirk of this machine, I had some other experiences with it I didn't really love. The UI for the software is not fantastic. It pretty much is literally mirroring exactly what's on the board. For me, when I'm using the HX STOMP, I'm constantly in and out of the editor. And it's just a much faster way to work for me. This didn't improve speed at all. And if anything, I ended up using the knobs on the actual device itself more than I was using the knobs inside the software. Speaking of that editor, it took us forever to find. I Googled it right when I got the box and couldn't find anything. We ended up going down kind of a rabbit hole of YouTube comments until we found the link. I'm sure this will get fixed pretty soon out the gate, but it was kind of frustrating being a day one buyer and not being able to find the editor software very easily. The other difficult part about getting this right out of the box was it came with a European power supply, which isn't usually a problem, except that it was one that I didn't have a switch for. And then on the back of the box it says it's 9 volts and 1 amp, and when I plugged a 9 volt 1 amp power supply in, it didn't turn on. So I tried a couple of different power supplies, ended up using the line 6 power supply, which is actually 3 amps, and it does work that way, but a little frustrating. So with all those negatives, there are a few positives, right? I do think the thing sounds pretty good if you're willing to put some work in. I don't think it really measures up to the line 6, and certainly not in ease of use or ease of tone for that matter either. But if you want to put the time in, I do think that it works. I think the screen looks great, which is really nice. It's something I don't love about the HX STOMP because it's so small. The screen's pretty tiny. This thing, very large, very clear, definitely bright and easily legible. And so I think it kind of comes down to the final question, which is, at half the price of the HX STOMP, is it still worth it? And this is kind of a tough one for me. So usually my experience with Harley Bentons is that the thing that you're buying is a great mod platform or a great starting point. But with something like a modeler like this, it's kind of limited by the functionality that it comes with, right? Whereas when you buy one of their guitars, you're buying a decently built guitar with maybe electronics that you don't love that you can switch out. You don't really have the luxury with something like this. So, do I think it's worth it? Not really. I think you could save up a little bit of extra money and you could pick up something like the HX STOMP used, for even not that much more than this is new, and you'd be way better off. That being said, I do think if you're really strapped for cash and you just need a modeler, there are some other options in this budget space that might suit you better. But what are your guys' thoughts? Do you think it's worth the money? Leave a comment below, tell us what you think about the tones, leave a like, subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one.